You just can't sprinkle AI over the top of a broken process, and then they start to realize that their data has to be adjusted, their workflows have to adjust. Probably around 1,700 digital startups, where about 15% of those are AI focused. In Dubai, it's very different. It's about ambition. But the government, the way it's structured here, actually, it has a minister of AI. So it is mandated right from the top. Businesses that deliver AI solutions get badges.
Welcome everyone to Startup Scaleup People podcast. Please remember to subscribe. I'm Mario Rivas, and for this context, I work in business integration and automation. And because of that, I'm excited to talk today with Tim Daines. He works between AI hype and operational reality, from strategy decks to production systems, between vendor promises and board level accountability. He has experience working in the UK, in Europe. Now he's based in the Middle East, in Dubai. He has obviously worked in multiple projects and within AI, and he also works in the NHS, for example, to help them to improve their operations. So excited to have you here today. Welcome.
Yeah, great to be here, Mario. Looking forward to unpacking more around the AI environment.
Great. Yeah, I had a conversation with Tim before about AI strategy, what he's doing in Dubai, and I found it very, very interesting. And that's why we are having this episode now, right? To provide a little bit of context, Tim, can you mention a little bit how big is the AI market, and in how many companies you have worked so far in Dubai and also in the UK?
Yeah, so if we look at the market at the moment, Dubai sits obviously in the United Arab Emirates. Its market is currently projected at US dollars around 47 billion by 2030. And if we would sort of dig into that specifically with Dubai, you're looking at around to date, probably around 1,700 digital startups, where about 15% of those are AI focused. So that's roughly about 250 AI-led startups in the year. You can also see what's going on a bit more here in terms of an infrastructure push. So we've got things like a large project called the Stargate project, which is a collaboration with a number of large American entities and also Chinese entities as well, which is apparently going to be the largest LLM data center in the world when it's completed. And that's going to push more into businesses across the Emirates. The Emirates is also a very interesting place because it's split into something that's called free zones. It also has districts as well. But one of the main hubs is one called DIFC, which is the financial quarter. And that's actually seen as Dubai's AI campus. So we do see a lot of companies there, so about 120 that have now secured specific AI licenses, and that's something that the government drives here, like getting AI licenses through those free zones. And that's a campus network that's now been forming, and it started in the first 6 months of AI organizations starting out in 2025. On my side, in terms of engagement with the Dubai industry here, so it's probably across a dozen organizations now, and where I'm getting involved with actually starting to talk about, well, what does enterprise AI actually look like? Because not a lot of people really sort of understand that. I've been involved with healthcare, working, obviously Dubai is a very hospitality and luxury driven industry, so supply chain and procurement is a big one here, where I'm engaging with organizations there, but also executive advisory. So the region is very much sort of grown through consulting models, so there is a very much top down, so engaging with managing directors, CEOs, CTOs, CFOs in that kind of traditional sense, and actually really touching on, well, what do we mean by AI in the first place, and how is it actually made up? That it goes, I would say, beyond what you would normally get on a conference stage with what I'm working with at the moment.
Well, that sounds interesting and powerful, because like, I think what Dubai is moving is like a lot of basically budget, right? And bigger than a lot of important countries here in Europe. And I imagine that how they operate is quite different too, right? As we were discussing previously. From the AI strategy, because in London, in generally in Europe, probably, I don't know how it's in the US, but at least in Europe and in London, AI strategy is very traditional, right? As we discussed. And we start in a sort of typical consulting, manner to create, like the frameworks or the basis before we start implementing AI. How does it work in Dubai? Because you've been in both, in both markets. How do you see how different is like AI strategy in Dubai or in UK?
Yeah. Well, for me, it's coming up to 22 years working in AI now. And when I started in it, yes, AI existed, but they didn't call it AI. And then it's gone through a number of different names, but everything really actually does attach to business strategy at the end of the day. So I'll take it from the lens of where I've come from, UK, and then what I'm learning here in Dubai. So for me in the UK, AI strategy from what I've seen over the last few years often breaks under the weight of caution. There's fragmentation, there's generally a committee behavior that's going on. It's meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. And there's a bit more of a sort of a governance language that's coming through, mainly because that's been driven through like GDPR, we've got EU regulation. And there's a lot of talk about, well, what could we do and how could we do it? And I would say that's lacking more around actually, well, what do we do around operational courage? How do we actually get stuff done? How do we start getting something in there? And yes, we're recognizing regulation, we're recognizing issues, but actually, where do we actually see this work where it's adding value to the organization? And more importantly, what workflows is it going to live in within the organization where we're actually going to start moving the needle and creating a new strategic moat for the business? In Dubai, it's very different. I do see actually an American model here, mainly because of the consultancy within the region, and it's been here for a number of decades. But it's about ambition. The capital is here, and there is a lot of capital about it, but the decisions to actually do things here are much more faster, and that's because the government here have mandated that businesses must be using AI, and that there must be a number of unicorns in the next couple of years where everyone is using AI, but the businesses are scaling with it as well. So what I see here is that the speed actually hides the fact that for many organizations, they're trying to work this out. But what I see is that there's a lot of vertical structured culture going on here, and they're not really ready for horizontal AI and that value creation across workflows. And I saw that in the UK, where actually we do see horizontal thinking, yet what kind of breaks that UK piece is there's a lot of over-governance, there's a lot of over-regulation with slow execution. In Dubai, I'm going to use the word strategy cautiously, because it doesn't generally start with strategy. It starts with where's ambition and what can we do and what's stopping us. And it's actually outrunning enterprise maturity at the moment. And I would say where I'm seeing the differences is that you've got the UK that needs to learn to go a lot more faster and actually probably use the constraints of regulation as something that shouldn't hinder innovation, but it actually should be guardrails for them to still execute. And then over in Dubai here, it's more around actually, well, where do we learn about operational depth so that we can actually start seeing value that comes out operationally and start seeing those results come through.
And you say the government mandates. Which type of initiatives are they running to support and encourage companies to do this?
So the government, the way it's structured here, actually, it has a minister of AI. So it is mandated right from the top. So there is not only this is what we want to do, but there is a strategy and it's executed. But they've also built in a layer here which gives out accreditations. Businesses that deliver AI solutions get badges that are a bit like an ISO standard, and those can be used where actually this is a trusted provider. There's also an integrated network here where you don't have technology professional services, you have vendors that attach to big global hyperscalers, and they go in and they supply integrations, or they'll supply platform building off of those hyperscalers there. So it's a very integrated model that goes beyond strategy, which is why I use the word strategy cautiously, and I talk about ambition, and that is the ambition that's real. They're executing, and they're actually, let's go test this straight away. Let's start building a demo in a week, and let's see what we can actually break in the process, and actually let's go and see where we can innovate.
And from the because you said that they are going, in a faster pace and they're doing a lot of implementation. Just to understand it in a simple words, is like companies they have a bottleneck, for example, in a workflow, right? And they say, okay, we have this bottleneck. How we resolve it? Like this? Okay, let's try. Simple like that, or how
Yeah.
do they do
So
it?
I mean, I'll give you an example of an organization I worked with recently. Is that actually, do you know what? We will just roll out Copilot and see who does what with it. And that was you could describe that as more tactical than strategy, because they wanted people to engage and start using a hyperscaler solution, and they wanted them to start engaging with and they start using LLMs. What happens when they start to play around with this technology? What do they do differently? That's very sort of different from the way that I would approach it. If I was working in the UK or perhaps Europe, I would actually let's start with a problem that we're trying to solve. Are there a set of key pain points in workflows that are affecting us financially, that are affecting what people are trying to do in terms of decision making? What are people trying to problem solve? So it's very much the way I describe to people is it's a completely flipped upside down approach, which is, let's just crack on, see what happens. And you could probably describe that as a very, very lean approach from a startup mentality. And if you look at the age of the country when the Emirates were formed, we're just over 50 years here, and we're actually, and then like I said, I do feel that there has been a bit of an American model here, consulting approach, which is get in there, get your hands dirty, roll your sleeves up, let's see what breaks, and let's learn as we go along.
Very startup mentality, right? And well, you've been working at both sides. Which has been the hardest challenge for you? What really tested you in this journey?
I mean, I would say honestly, the hardest part has actually been building in a market with huge ambition, but it's also had huge AI noise. And my background has come from very enterprise building. I do work with startups, and I also work with startups within commercial organizations that are quite large as well. But in order to get to scale, to be truthful about that sort of ambition and that noise, you've got to start with I start with a bit of foresight thinking, really, like what does success actually look like? What would an enterprise AI solution look like in an organization? And the hardest bit has been, no one actually starts with that. And it's been very much actually, let's get people using this here and let's see what they do with it. And then we go from there and we'll pick up the technical debt afterwards. So it's very much the bit that is hard here is actually, it's easy to sell the magic in. So the amount of demos that I see sold in is, I don't know, probably more than I've actually had cooked dinners. And everyone gets so excited and they go, wow, now let's go put it into production. But the real blocker and the challenge that hasn't been called out here is, so how we're going to design our data ready for AI though? What's the workflow logic got to look like? And what's the cognitive decision making that's going on with humans, with those people that store knowledge in their head, which doesn't actually go into our systems, because AI is going to need that. It's integrations, it's security. A lot of people miss this, and they don't realize that that's actually quite imperative, because that all rolls up into governance. So I think, building from that, and actually I haven't actually really had a network here to actually start with that there. I've actually sort of had to go and actually run before I could actually walk here. Those situations have been very much, the hype has actually been outrunning enterprise foundation. And it's not been easy to sort of move to that, but I've had to move to that where actually, do you know what we're doing here is we're building prototypes and we're learning fast, but you've got to think about the prototype has to immediately jump to production. And that's been a bit of a mindset that I've had to adjust to, but it's been a hard challenge. It has been a hard challenge.
It's an experience, life experience, right? And do you move there alone, or do you move with your partner? How does it work?
No, I actually, having done 10 years back in the UK, and some neighboring countries in Europe. The push for me was the country was about to go through a landslide change in the government, and I'd already lived through that government twice before. I didn't want to live through it a third time, but also, you get to that point where it's like you've done a decade of learning, and it'd been a mix of traveling over to the US, doing the UK. I'd been over to areas not far from Russia, but also within Europe. And so actually for me, it was like, I've not actually explored the Middle East, and I just felt a change was needed. So that was the reason for coming over here. I do have a network of colleagues here who actually work for some of the local Emirati organizations, and we've had some interesting conversations around actually how have they adapted here. So that's also helped me along the journey as well.
And to understand a little bit more about what you do in terms of the services that you provide, can you explain in simple words which are the services that you provide in Dubai? Not complicated, like very simple, so people can understand what actually you do, how you help companies if they want to reach out to you, for example.
Yeah. So first of all, I start with my thought leadership, and actually it's applied thought leadership. I write about what I see, and I communicate how can organizations do things differently where they can get to using AI in their business and seeing what it looks like. And I write a lot on Substack, and I write on LinkedIn. And then what I also do is I provide training for executives, and also for those people who are working in business development, who are trying to sell in AI into the organization, or domain leads. And basically that's more about maturity upskilling. What do we mean by AI? What are the components of an AI solution? How would you run a project? How would you bring an organization with you that builds confidence that AI isn't here to replace their job? Is to help them remove all of the gnarly issues that they complain about every day, and how do you help them navigate through those problems using AI as a tool? And then finally, if it's more sort of bespoke, or more sort of like, actually we want to do a bit of a transformation within a team, I'll come in and I'll help them do perhaps a small project for them so that they can start owning it and operationalizing AI within whatever the problem is that we're actually trying to solve.
And do you help them also do you have like tech partners who help you to develop also like applications or tools for them?
So this is an interesting one, because the way in which Dubai promotes AI, actually, the first thing that has to be thought about is sovereignty. This is a sovereign country, and the thing that goes through their mind is data and how data is actually used. So generally what tends to happen here is that anything that does have to be used has to be within country. That's the first thing. So we do have the big hyperscalers here, but those data centers have to be located within the country itself. So across all of the Emirates, there are data centers that come out of telcos, there are data centers that come out of hyperscalers, and then what happens on top of that is a vendor will be supplied there, and then they will be procured within an organization because they have been vetted and approved by the government.
Yeah, like a very structured, basically, way of working. You were talking about the UK often feels quite compliance-led, right? And then Dubai feels ambition-led. Which side is easier for you to correct when the programs start failing?
Yeah, this is a great question. Generally, I find that it's the ambition-led that's easier to correct. But it's only if leadership wants to be honest with itself that things are going wrong and we need to change something. What I notice here within the culture is it's very sort of pyramid and hierarchy, and actually that cross-functional, bottom-up, flat matrix approach is a challenge sometimes for a lot of organizations here, mainly because of where they've come from, mainly because of, I think what I observe is consultancy has sort of infiltrated in top-down mentality. When you work with a leadership team, what you find is that people have spent a long time in organizations, they've climbed the ladder, and so actually embarrassment is the first thing that they want to avoid. They don't want to be embarrassed. So that is the bit that I mean about honesty here. But they're also enthusiastic. They want to be first, but they don't want to be embarrassed when it goes wrong if they can't be first. So that is the navigational piece that has to happen. If the will to move exists with that honesty bit there, what you can see is actually, do you know what? We've learned from this now, and actually foundations underneath this is actually important. We now need to build foundations, and they generally learn that through through that initial failure of I describe it of just sprinkling AI on top of an existing broken process, and they learn very quickly actually you just can't do that. You just can't sprinkle AI over the top of a broken process, and then they start to realize that their data has to be adjusted, their workflows have to adjust, and then you're decomposing things at that point there. If I think about the UK, and for me, as a Brit from East London, and having grown up in this with the healthcare, life science, oil and gas industry, a lot of compliance-led environments are harder because caution is culture. And there's a lot of this attitude of sort of red tape is kind of what I would call it. So, and I find that people confuse risk management with progress, and they end up polishing, I kind of describe it, polishing the brakes on the car while it's still parked, but they haven't tested the vehicle yet, and really run it into the ground to the point, what can it do, how do we break it, and everything like that. So I tend to see that in the UK. So I like the ambition more led approach within an organization here, because you actually, you learn quicker, but you're navigating this discipline of actually caution, and actually you have to be careful with how you describe to people, it's not a failure, it's actually where do we need to adapt and iterate. We've learned something better than competitors now. We've developed some IP here. What do we need to adjust and change to actually keep going faster and keep that ambition going? And I admire that, actually. And it's not sort of stuck in paralysis of compliance led, which is what I tend to see in the UK.
Yeah, it feels like they have well, obviously it's a fast pace, but they have the mindset, the resilience, right, to do that. You see a lot of that in manufacturing, transportation, logistics, supply chain, where you have a fast workflows, real. You use tech, but everything is like moving goods, moving people, moving things, right? And you have to improve, you have to adapt, you have very stress, and you move on. It's like that sort of mentality that they are applying. I see in tech, which obviously is very risky, right? Because they are taking decisions and implementing. Probably some people can say or think that they are implementing stuff without thinking. But in the reality, they think, and probably they think they know what they're doing very well. So just they want to fix it and move on, And I think that everything is driven, as you mentioned, due to the ambition. Yeah, I never been in Dubai. Obviously, I want to go some one day, but not as tourist. I would like to go and see, how company works. Like be more like in a professional manner rather than a tourist, to feel what you are mentioning. Yeah. So yeah, well, you're very, very lucky to be there. From the AI investments, right? Because there are a lot of AI investments. People say that there is a bubble. People are saying that it's not gonna create the returns of the investment. And the big AI organizations are running out of money doing fundraising, like having increasing the evaluations again and again, implementing all these infrastructure projects, right, to be able to maintain AI, but without having any, without gaining, profits. And actually, some people say that they don't know if they are gonna get profits one day. And if we translate this into like smaller companies, right? Because smaller companies also are doing AI investment across different projects, right? And sometimes these fail. Which is the real cause from your side? Of course, it's going to depend on the different organizations, but it could be bad timing, bad strategy, or executives, they don't wait enough, or they don't invest enough to wait for the operational changes, for example. On your experience, where do you see which is the main failure in terms of AI investment?
Yeah, this is a great question. I mean, usually what I find and what I see, and I also see it here because there's a lot of Silicon Valley investors that are over here now. And Dubai is a place that people investing is that I see they're funding theatre instead of operational change. And that's no surprise really, because, they want that shiny layer. the foundations underneath it, that's the details, that's complicated, the demo looks great, we can license out of this, and we can start having benchmarking conversations before going into all the detail around, like, well, who's going to own this? I don't see any conversations about workflow redesign, which is an incredibly vital part about AI, before we actually even get to the models. How is data going to change? How's it going to get used? Because that is actually going to be a commodity and a strategic moat for businesses. Integration, security, what's the business metric that we're really trying to move here with this that has never been moved before? I'd say that where I've learned from this in terms of the reality of ROI in this is that it's very rare that it's the LLM model that's actually returning on in the investment. And I've learned this through when built out a company with my co-founder, which was called Templonics, and this was actually an agentic system. It was more infrastructure, and it wasn't agents. It was basically building out an architecture, actually at an enterprise level, and how do you put that into existing sunk cost that was already been spent within a company's enterprise architecture. And what we learned from that was actually, do you know what, the ROI is just not in the LLMs here. Where most of the failure was coming from was actually that, because everyone was funding the models. Where we saw the ROI actually through working with a couple of companies on this was actually, it's where is debt in integrations for APIs? Where is actually the weak data coming from that's actually hemorrhaging the revenues because we're spending so much trying to fix this? Where are the poor workflows that have not been understood, where we're seeing significant duplication? And we actually spent a bit of time on sales processes of renewing contracts that actually impacted ARR within companies. And actually, it was the knowledge bleed in workflows, which was the critical problem here that was actually costing the ROI. And actually, the commercial ownership, the most important person out of this ROI story at the moment that I don't see anyone really talking about is the CFO. They're going to have to pay for this. They're going to have to maintain it. They're going to have to understand that they're going to enter a non-deterministic world with models rolling off that are just, I call them like rogue children. And if they're not managed and they're pinging away on APIs and they're pinging away on data, their budgets and actuals in their actual financial quarters are just going to go through the roof, and they're going to lose control of this. And I've actually seen this in an oil and gas company, which has completely lost control of its data budget alone. And you've got the CEO turning around like, why am I paying now a third of my organization on data alone? I've now got to get rid of staff. And this is why I sort of see that the AI...
When you say data, what do you mean? Which are the main, like, it's cloud, data storage? What do you mean?
I'm talking about data debt. I'm talking about vertical models within businesses. They'll create their own data and they'll put it in a report. They'll create their own Active Directory, and they'll wrap a load of privacy around that with certain individuals who have access to that. But then some of that data might have to be used by another division. So then what do? They duplicate that data, and then they'll go and create that again. And then they'll go and create another Active Directory group around it. And then I put new permissions. Now I've got data duplication. I've got integration security debt because I've created things twice. They've not thought about actually organizationally, what do I want to do with my data so that it gets used once but propagates across multiple divisions, because I know it's going to get used more than once. And it just completely exposes a business. But where it comes out is the debt comes out in the data bill. And this is where you start seeing people challenging, well, why am I paying so much money for a hyperscaler? What's actually going on here? Because they're not actually measured what's going on with integration, what's going on with quality of data, what's going on with who is actually interacting with the data. And that's actually where the real numbers live. And then what I see at the moment, if we go back to the AI investments, is they're funding the automations, they're funding the latest models. They're not looking at any of this other stuff. And I think this is a missed trick at the moment. And those companies that work out that, how do I describe that abstraction? I call it the intelligence layer that they need to build. Those will be the ones that work out, this is the ROI that I'm trying to capture out of a business.
Coming back to, because, we talk about ROI, right? And we have to create all like framework, dashboards, and all the like the basis to manage, all the data to understand the ROI. But there are other like more simple KPIs that CFO, COO, or the CEO can use to track progress of this AI investment, and also to track if they are going into a failure phase or going into a success phase.
So could you give me an example there of what that might be?
I know, for example, we were implementing AI automation, right, for a specific task, which in reality was very simple. It was just to reduce manual tasks, from a person who was like 8 hours sat doing something, right? And we automated that. We reduced like around 30% of that person every day. Obviously, the point wasn't replacing the person. The point was what else that person can do with the time available, right? So they were seeing that that person was decreasing, the AI automation was increasing, obviously, by the time, because this takes time, like the efficiency and also the errors, until there was a moment that, it was working properly, right? Not making mistakes, not hallucinations, and nothing like that. So it started working properly. And this person had availability to do other tasks in terms of sales, for example, right? Or improving like the customer, experience, and that converting into sales, plugging sales and winning projects, basically. So in there, it was very easy because it was a very specific task, a very small project, right? It was very easy to understand, like, time reduction, optimization, and then, how many other tasks or conversations with clients were delivered, right? So they could see that quite easily. They were building their own KPIs and time reductions, and then like prospection, right?
Yeah.
And they saw like that basically decreasing and increasing, and that meant into new contracts, right? New projects. So they saw that very easily. There is something like that you can say that the people can do to track operationally how, if at least their automations are improving the business or not, or what, because obviously I'm talking about something very simple. But you've been working in massive projects, right? Massive projects, massive programs in big organizations, which is very difficult. Right. To track. So that's why I asked this question. If you've seen like a few KPIs, or how you create a dashboard which can guide them through this journey.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about dashboard first of all. I've worked in organizations where there've been about 50,000 Power BI boards, and I'm like, but what value is that? What value? I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with dashboards, because you cannot build a dashboard for everyone, because everyone wants different information. So I think, first of all, just on that, is that actually I don't start with the dashboard about what KPI metric to start on. I think the second thing is the exact KPI that we're looking at actually is around, well, what is the domain that we're looking at here? Because domains are different, and there's going to be different leading indicators, different lagging indicators, which is why starting with a dashboard isn't actually the right thing to do. It's actually what are the patterns that people want to see, and who wants to see those patterns, which is the more consistent approach to this. When I think about this, I think about this in three categories. And the first one is actually workflow outcome for the KPI. So you've touched on time in motion, time to decision. That's a key metric, right? Okay, I'm employing someone to do something 8 hours a day. I'm giving them an FTE salary, but actually they're absorbing a lot of time in research. Let's take the sales example. And what I really want them to do is I want them to close. I want them to close so that I've got a bigger, fatter pipeline, and I want them to focus on the bigger sales things. And I don't want them doing the mundane, low ARR things within the organization. So can I improve time to decision? That would be a key metric that I want to look at. I then want to look at conversion rates. Okay, how have I improved my conversion where I've got more throughput? What's the length of what's the length of that taking, and can I improve it? Do I need human in the loop, or do I just need someone to check it? I'm going to keep on the sales one. How many potential customers within a sales pipeline didn't show, and how quickly did we get on to the next one, and then the next one, and the next one? So overall, this sort of pipeline, there's cycle time that I would be looking at. Am I seeing cycle time improve as a result of that? Throughput. And then there's the actual person that's actually trying to sell for me. How much is that now costing me to serve customers, and am I increasing on that as a result of that? So that's a key one that I look at first of all, because it's all about time, it's all about throughput, it's all about that cycle. The second one that I look at is I do look at adoption, but I look at adoption from the quality of usage. The amount of times that I see people with an AI solution that go in, hi, good morning, how are you? You know, that's not adoption, that's wasting tokens and I'm burning money. So have I got people coming into their role? Yes, I need conversational going on, but are they coming straight in and loading up a chat or something and going, hey, I now want you, good morning, or something like that, agent, researcher, I want you to do this for me this morning, and I want you to go up and do this task because I'm trying to do this, and these are the key things that I'm looking for. Straight away, goes off to a task. It's not having a conversation like you're having a coffee machine moment with it, because actually tokens is money in a business, right? And this is why I think a lot of people don't realize that you're paying for tokens and you're paying for API calls and you're paying for data calls, and this is what is costing the money and impacting your ROI. So, you know, with that, I'm not interested in vanity usage. You know, that's actually bleeding on my technical and my data bill. It's the embedded use that I'm really looking at. It's the systemization piece that, like, I've embedded AI into my workflow now, but are people bypassing that because they're going, good morning, did you have a good night's sleep, or something like, what did you do last night? And I do see people doing that, actually, especially in chatbots, which is just a waste of money. And then there's this third piece, which is, this is now the economic signal. This is about the money, right? This is the, did I reduce costs? Have I recovered revenue? Have I lowered risk of overspend? Have I improved my margin? And have I got a measurable way of actually doing that now? And this is the one that's the important conversation with the CFO, because I'd rather be having a conversation with the CFO about, okay, this is the time that you're now spending on people whilst they're using AI, and this is what this is doing to revenue, this is what it's doing to your cash flow, it's actually going down to zero, and this is what we're doing with margins. I'd rather have that conversation than generic productivity ones, which are vanity metrics, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, I get your points. Some of them are operational, other ones are more like strategic. It depends how to use it, as you mentioned. And when we are heading to the end of the episode, time went very fast. We couldn't talk everything that we wanted. Maybe we can do a second session with other two AI experts. I think it's gonna be very, very good conversation. Before we leave, I always try to the guests to share a little bit about their experience, failures, or lesson learned. So the question is basically, what is the biggest lesson you have learned, and what would you do different?
What's the biggest lesson I've learned, and what would I do different? I need to think about that for a minute. You know, I think it's how I've gone about talking to boards, actually. And people who are approving on budgets and everything like that, in terms of how do we go about making sure that we're investing in the right organization. I'm actually having conversations now with people who run PE funds and VC funds most weekends at the moment at social gatherings. I don't know what to invest in. I think the biggest learning that I'm finding here is that I need to start more at the moment, especially in this region, with, you've got to start with a shiny toy. You've got to start with, what are you trying to see out of the prototype, and what are you trying to monetize out of that? What are you trying to get a dividend out of? What are you trying to generate with revenues? Where I'm starting at the moment is I'm starting at before the rollout. I'm starting out with where you're trying to find proof, and what is it that you're actually trying to solve as a problem, and who's accountable, and what kind of data are you trying to generate to create a new strategic moat that attaches to your portfolio. Those are conversations that people are not really thinking about. They're thinking about, actually, how do I get something into production in the hands of users, in the hands of customers, where I can actually start seeing tactical usage and go, look, I was first, I've done this. And that's what's really important to them. And then, of course, what obviously comes with that as well is, but I want to see revenue come off the back of that at the same time as well, but I want to see it in 1 year. I don't want to see it in 3 years. My conversations tend to be about, well, you're not going to recover in the first year, because actually the biggest challenge you're going to have here is foundations and enterprise value to actually grow a business. Because I think through an enterprise lens, the more you're sort of building on top of existing infrastructure, if they've got it, I'm thinking about sunk cost within organization, about how do you capitalize on that sunk cost, which is why I think 90% of AI projects fail at the moment. People aren't thinking that way. They're thinking about, I'll just sprinkle a chatbot over the top of my business process. There I've got AI, which is actually, it's not AI in my opinion. So, but this is what I'm learning is actually I've got to change the language. I've got to start with the shiny toy to get to the bit around foundations and enterprise, because actually it's not the sexy piece. And also stop starting with data. Like, yes, it's an important component of this. And I do see a lot around, actually, there's a lot of education that needs to happen on data products that a lot of people are not talking about at the moment. But I think that's for another conversation, another time. That's generally where I start, but people don't get it. They don't understand it. They don't understand, why do I need to start with the data product? All I want to see is, have I got a chatbot that's outperforming this competitor, and am I actually seeing an improvement in revenue? And that's where I need to shift to a bit more. And I'm learning. That's what I'm learning at the moment, and then navigate into the enterprise piece.
Well, it's those are the tough conversations, right, with these type of people. And you are playing lesson learned, right? That you're ambitious. You're ambitious too. That's why you are there, and you're doing all of this. And you are in a very, very ambitious environment with very ambitious people. So yeah, I can imagine that the conversations are not easy there as well.
Yeah,
but they are very good. They are very good in terms of progress and be on top of the new trends. So yeah, very well done, Tim. I very like what you're doing. Congratulations with everything. Before we close, how people can reach out to you, how people can find you if they want to work with you?
Yeah, I write on Substack. It's called the Product AI Agent, so they can find me on there. I don't write theory. I write applied. I write what I'm seeing in organizations. I'm seeing what's actually going on, and I put that perspective across. I talk through two lenses. I talk through product enterprise lens, but I also talk around these are the things that I'm seeing that these are the problems that companies are trying to solve with AI, and these are the issues with why it's not working, because of knowledge systems and data systems, things like that. And then there's the usual suspect, LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn there, and you can connect with me, DM me if you want to talk about this a bit more. And that's where I navigate across those two channels.
Super. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. It was a very good conversation. We have to do another one with another AI expert. I think it's going to be very, very interesting. And yeah, thank you so much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. Great to chat about it.
Cheers. Bye-bye.